Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Our guest today is a founder and managing partner of Uncork Capital, formerly SoftTech VC, one of the original seed VC firms in the Silicon Valley, and has closed 200 plus investments since 2004. His portfolio includes Postmates, Poshmark, Fitbit, and many others. He was also a board member of the National Venture Capital Association and was featured on the Forbes Midas List among top venture capitalists in the world. His name is Jeff Clavier. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Grace, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Jeff, first of all, you're definitely one of the most popular VCs on social media. I really enjoyed all the podcasts you were on, and you have a fantastic track record.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you're having me on your show.
Jeff, I don't think you have said this in a podcast, but from one of the blogs I've read, your dream when you were younger was to be a chef.
Yes, you're very, very well researched. Indeed, when I was 12, I met with someone who was helping with, orientation. We called those guys orientation counselors in France. And I wanted to go to professional cooking schools because I wanted to be a chef. And the guy looked at my grades, and I was a straight A student. And he was like, what the hell? Why would you do that? Just go do math, physics, and Latin, because that's what you do in France. You always do math, physics, Latin, German, English, and then end up, wherever. And so, no, I didn't end up in cooking school, and maybe I would have been a chef. But, I know my ways into cooking. So only my family actually, experiences that.
What kind of food do you cook? Is that just purely French food, or do you cook pastries, or like what's your favorite dish?
It's, mostly, French inspired dishes, a lot of barbecue as well. But I'm really good at just preparing, something based on whatever is left in the fridge. So like, spending 5-10 minutes putting something together based on leftovers, I'm good at that as well.
I feel you. I feel like that's the most amount of like cooking skill you need for cooking anything.
Exactly.
You've moved from France to the US.
Yep.
Before that, you worked at a fintech startup as a CTO. The company got bought by Reuters. You started working in their VC arm in the Bay Area. You're quite successful now as a VC. What experiences do you think had changed your perspective on your career trajectory? What gives you the motivation to master what you do today?
It's, I've actually never thought about, like, I didn't really have a plan. And so serendipity has had a huge impact on what I've become. And, in my experience, if ever you do something and it doesn't work out, then you'll just go do something else. So it's just worth trying. So that's how I got into market finance back in the late 80s, almost by accident. Which turned into, doing a startup, which turned into an acquisition by Reuters. And then in 2000, after 12 years as a CTO, I just felt that I had sort of done my thing. And so I was kind of thinking about, hey, what do I do next? And a friend of mine who was running the venture arm of Reuters, said, hey, we're looking for someone to run the fund in the Bay Area, and we really want someone with a strong operation background. Because, the fund had made a bunch of investments being headquartered in London. And, most of the portfolio was in the Bay Area, and it was, March 2000. And so everything had imploded. And so you need like a lot of operating chops to sort of figure out what to do with the portfolio, which was just burning, right, left, and center. And so I said, look, I know nothing about venture capital, but I know something about operating and, managing operations and firing people if ever your burn is too high, and so on and so forth. And so that's what I joined to do, and learned the VC gig on the job, and eventually decided to start my own firm.
Yeah, I assume at that point, people in France was probably really prefer the traditional career path, working for a big corporation. Were your family cool with you moving to the US, doing all these startup related works? Was it all smooth, or were there some sort of frictions when you were going to pursue your dreams?
Yeah, no. At the time, you would definitely sort of work for a big company, and you would not join a startup. And so when I told my parents that I was going to do a startup, right, in 1989, my late dad sort of told me, "I don't understand. You've always had good grades." And I was like, "What the hell does that have to do with my grades?" And he's like, "Well, you had good grades. You had, we thought you would have a good job, stable job." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's boring. Like, I want to do this thing, which is much more interesting," and so on and so forth. And, lo and behold, it sort of worked out, and the company was successful. And then it was acquired, which, the fact that it was acquired by a company which was worth multiple billions of dollars. Okay, it was English, but at least, they understood it was very, very successful. Made them at ease. And then when I told them that in 2000 I was going to move with my young family to the US, we basically visited them in my hometown, brought them a PC, and said, "Hey, from now on, we're going to communicate with this thing. So you're going to learn, how to use Microsoft Messenger," because at the time you didn't have Skype, right? And they were like, "Why would we do that?" It's like, because we're going to be in California, and that will be the way we interact. And, blank face, blank stare. And they were like, "Oh, we'll never come see you." And in 21 years, actually never visited us.
Wow. That's, I'm glad that the PC was working. So that's crazy.
They're on to their, third, fourth sort of PC. They also have a Facebook portal, which is great for, sort of video conferences. But yeah, it was hard on them to see us go, because it wasn't the generation that, thinks about just moving around. And like, yeah, already for me, moving from my hometown of Tours to Paris to do my engineering degree was already a big thing, right? And so moving, 9 hours behind them, half of the world away, was a big shock.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like you just sounds really brave at the moment. You're taking a lot of risks. Nowadays, everyone is starting a quote unquote startup in their home. But back then, you were really thinking independently to make the move. Since your parents were kind of surprised when you decided to make the switch, who do you consult your career decisions with? In other words, who is on your personal board of advisors?
I think at the time, trying to sort of remember, my beloved wife was also, obviously she was clearly deeply involved, because, she was going to move with me. So we had long conversations about it. The guy who actually sort of decided to bring me in is someone I had known for a long time. He was one of the senior managers at Reuters, one of my old bosses, who really wanted to see me stay at Reuters, but understood that, either to keep me in the Reuters, sort of world, I had to sort of go do something different. And I think, to his credit, Louis Knopf was his name, sort of saw that either I had too much potential or too much appetite for risk that Reuters could kind of offer to me, because they basically had this program where once you had spent a bunch of time, in a business unit, you had to move. And so I was up for moving, but nothing that they had for me was interesting except that gig in venture capital. And I think as long as we thought it was going to be a good experience for the two of us, in the family could sort of get something out of it. And worst, if ever, it was a failure, then we just move back to France and we're okay with it. I think we just dealt with the risky, part. But I remember August 10th, 2000 is when we moved, right? My son was 3 years old. My daughter, so my wife was pregnant with my daughter, 5 months. And we ended up in this temporary apartment on Middlefield Road in Palo Alto. And I went, to Safeway to just get some pasta and some tomato sauce for dinner. And I came back to the temporary apartment and I was, what the fuck did I just do? What the hell did we sort of put ourselves into? Because it's a brand new country. We have temporary accommodation. We have this young family. My wife is, pregnant, and what the hell am I doing? And I'm starting a job that I have not, zero clue as to what it means, right? Because the VC world is actually not that complex, but when you join it from the outside, it's very, very opaque, especially one of the reasons why I started one of the first VC blogs back in 2004 is that there was so much opacity around the VC world. And, if you were not in it, you didn't really know what it meant and how it was done. It was very arcane. And so there was sort of this feeling of loneliness. And what the hell did I do? I think, in the early days in 2000, but, it just worked out.
Yeah, I mean, that's super real. I can totally relate. I have the same thought every day. I feel like it takes a lot of gut to make the move. And also, I think it's really great that your wife was super supportive. I know that down the line, you were investing out of your own pocket. Yep. She decided to fully support your decisions. I'm sure there were some interesting conversations there. In the end, you kept pursuing your VC career. Obviously, you're super successful today.
She's been, incredible in terms of supporting me and the fact. I mean, she's a awesome sort of executive on her own, and she decided to leave her job back in France. She was kind of the equivalent of the marketing sort of manager for the French Target, and so she decided to sort of drop that and move to the US, and she couldn't work for 4 years because of our visa green card sort of situation. Yeah. And she now runs the Center for Social Innovation at Stanford, which is awesome. But she's been supporting me all the way when we decided to make that move. And then when I had this crazy idea to become a full-time angel investor in 2004, tapping into our hard-earned savings. So we had made a little bit of money at Reuters, not a ton. And I said, hey, I'd like to basically take $250K of our savings and then start investing that cash into super early stage startups where it's the craziest and most risky, because I think that there is an opportunity in what was then, called Web 2.0 and when no one else was investing.
I feel like that says so much about you and your family. And sounds really like a true partnership. She sounds really talented as well. As an international student myself, moving to a different city, it's already a lot of unknown, and then you have to instantly build up a network here, trying to get a job in the local space. I feel like there's just a lot of challenges, and I'm really glad and really happy that you guys work out great now.
Yep.
I'm curious about, because you were originally from France, everyone's on the internet now, but back in time, assuming you have to build up a network locally, right? What were some actions you took to get to know people here and then breaking into that core circle of venture capital?
Yeah, that was really sort of interesting. So, when I moved here, so first, I had spent some time in the Valley for my job at Reuters. So we had bought a company called Technical Software Systems, which was based in Palo Alto. And, I sort of went back and forth between Paris, New York, London, and Palo Alto. So I had a few sort of industry contacts. And then my former boss basically said, hey, go meet that guy called Ron Conway. and he knows everyone. He will introduce you to a bunch of people, which, I did. And Ron Conway, who's the godfather of Silicon Valley, was literally my first meeting after just a few weeks here at the end of August 2000. And then, I used the French network. So there's a decent amount of French people in the Valley. So I basically went and kissed the ring. There was always a bunch of VC events. And so as a VC, I just went to meet a bunch of other VCs. We had a bunch of portfolio companies. So I went visit, every single sort of CEO. And, I spent just a bunch of time meeting people to build the network, and eventually, build the referral network, which got me into deals, and, chased, hustled, spent a lot of time out of the house for sure, meeting people, going to conferences, speaking at conferences, hanging out in the lobby of conferences to meet people, and, to be candid, wasting a lot of time in unproductive events, but also making critical sort of connections at the time with friends and co-investors I still have to this day.
Yeah, I feel like that just takes a lot of hustle as a foreigner. I came from China, and then I was already in school in America, but and then moving to Silicon Valley without knowing anyone. I feel like you have to knock on a lot of doors technically to just break in. And I feel like every single day, it's kind of like a sales pitch, because you have to sell to other people, assuming like Silicon Valley and friends, there's still a gap, right? They have to heard about your company's name, and then you have to sort of prove your legitimacy. I feel like there's just a lot of sales job within the VC job. How do you position yourself to be this person that can getting into the top deals?
Well, so few things. One, I would say that one of the key characteristics of the Valley is the fact that it really accepts people. Like, you and I are immigrants, and the fact that we're like, no one tells us here, like, why would you do this? You're an immigrant. Like, it's not your place. Like, people have been so very accepting on one side. And I think, the fact that rewinding things and going back to 2003, 2004, you just didn't have a ton of people willing to write checks to entrepreneurs who had crazy ideas around what they could build. And so the fact that, I was pretty much unknown, I had pretty much zero track record, and it was sort of not clear how I could help, was superseded by the fact that I was willing to write a 25K check or 50K check to an entrepreneur who had a dream, right? And like, unlike today, where you have thousands and thousands and thousands of ways to get a 50K check, like, as long as I was willing to invest, support, and do no harm, people were just, very welcoming. And so I benefited a lot from the fact that I was one of the early movers. And then I established my track record. And the interesting thing is that back in the early days of Web 2.0, a lot of those companies got acquired very early by Web 1.0, sort of Yahoo and even Google and things like that. And so, unlike today, where it takes years to build a track record, after a couple of years, I was, already very successful as an angel. And so people were looking at not only, the fact that I could sort of write a check and I could help, but I also had a track record of successful investment that had an exit. And so I could help them, fundraise, I could help them potentially sell. And so it became sort of a much easier value proposition, and still required hustle. And we still hustle to this day, 21 years later. But it's based on what we've accomplished.
Although you credit some of your success to the timing, I feel like it's mostly because of your taking a lot of smart risks. You saw the opportunity really early on, you believed in the companies, and you put your own checks in, be one of the first people investing in those companies, supporting the entrepreneur's dream. That's really admirable. Nowadays, VC became so many people's dream career. What do you think is a great opportunity that is today's equivalent of investing in startups back in time?
Yeah, I mean, the fact today that entrepreneurs have massive choices, right? You can literally walk up and down, University Avenue in Palo Alto or wherever in San Francisco, because San Francisco is kind of shut down right now. And you could sort of raise, a bunch of money, means that as someone who wants to invest in startups, you have to figure out how to make your thesis and the kinds of things you're interested in sort of known, right? So, people sort of use new platforms. They tweet a lot. They will have, podcasts. They will do TikTok videos, whatever is sort of used these days, or they will write a newsletter, right, on Substack. But I think it's about getting the market to know that you're ready and willing to write checks and you have a thesis, which, makes you the target of entrepreneurs who want to get a very specific sort of type of business or company sort of funded. Because I've been around for so long, I can just say, look, I'll just invest in small entrepreneurs building big companies. And that's enough to define what I do. And people will say, well, because Jeff has funded so many different types of companies, it's not like he's only doing like X, Y, or Z, right? Even though we're very focused on SaaS these days. And that gives us, the opportunity to really see a wide swath of companies. If I was starting a firm, raising a first fund and so on and so forth, I would have to have a clear sort of shtick, which is, what am I going to be specialized on? What am I going to be so good at that people will sort of come to me because of that specific thesis and knowledge, right? So be super narrow, but super deep, as opposed to being, pretty broad and knowing a bunch of things and having done a bunch of things.
Speaking of your investments, they're all in different sectors. Poshmark is in fashion and e-commerce. By the way, congrats on the IPO. Postmates is a food delivery company. Mint, Eventbrite, Fitbit, they're all in different industries. How do you learn about an industry in a short amount of time as a VC?
That's one of the most, that's a real challenge right there because, first, obviously, we're kind of thesis driven. So we have a bunch of thesis around horizontal SaaS, vertical SaaS, developer tools and things like that. But when a lab grown diamond company comes to me, I have zero thesis because I have zero knowledge about the market, right? But if I think that the entrepreneur is really sort of super smart and has big ideas and can actually sort of go someplace with what he or she is planning to do, if I validate quickly that the market is, very large and can support a company which is going to scale to multi-$100 million in revenues, I basically sort of do a bunch of due diligence on the market, on the product, on the competition, so on and so forth, talking to experts, friends, people who have funded companies in the space. And, I need to be able to make a decision within a week to 10 days. So I'm going to go and educate myself talking to people who are way smarter than I am on the market. And then, after a week to 10 days, I'll sort of look at what I've learned and I'll say, okay, so what this entrepreneur is doing works with those sort of general trends. And I can see that if they succeed and they do X, Y, Z, then they could go on and raise a Series A, then a Series B, and then we have a shot. And that's how I ended up investing in a lab-grown diamond company about 2 years ago, which is still not announced. It's still sort of stealth. And we'll see where it goes. And, I've done that with, a quantum computing company in the biotech space. I've done that with Makerspace and Messari in the crypto NFT space. I've done that, in a space tech company called Loft Orbital, which is doing extremely well. And every time I sort of go into those sort of frontier tech kind of investments, I have no idea about what I'm doing, right? Because it's not like I've done it before, 10 times, like when I invest in a SaaS company or in a hardware company. But it's also sort of what can potentially open massive opportunities and, to be very candid, also what makes it so fun.
I think learning new things, chatting with interesting industry experts is what's so wonderful about the VC job. Besides learning new things, another big part of the job is figuring out the financial side of things. Do they have the interesting and scalable product? And are they actually going to generate amazing returns? Which lead to my next question. LinkedIn seems like a company really focusing on growth at the beginning. You pass on it for various reasons. Curious, what have you learned from the companies you've passed?
Yeah, I mean, my worst passes are, in no particular order. But personally, I would say LinkedIn, Twilio, and the bummers there were that I would have loved to actually work. I mean, Reid Hoffman is a close friend, but I would have loved to work with Reid. Jeff Lawson is a close friend, but I would love to work with Jeff. And then I passed on Uber, Airbnb, and Coinbase. The three of them being, worth $100 billion or so. And as I look back at the reasons why I passed, I mean, Coinbase, I was like, oh, those are smart guys, and it would make sense to sort of do a kind of foundational investment in the crypto space because it's kind of a tool, Coinbase, being sort of the wallet. But I didn't really sort of have any conviction around crypto, so that's why I sort of didn't go and pursue, which is dumb. Airbnb, when they my friend Sam Angus, who was representing them as their lawyer, tried to have me meet with the Airbed and Breakfast team 3 times, sending me sort of the deck, and it was called Airbed and Breakfast. And the story was, hey, you can rent an airbed in someone's side bedroom when you go and attend a conference, to pay less than a hotel room. And I was like, who the hell would do that, right? So I passed on the meeting. And then finally, after he insisted, I said, okay, fine, I'll take the meeting. And then, I was supposed to meet with them the day they signed the term sheet with Sequoia for their round. And so the meeting didn't happen. And Uber, I really didn't, I wanted to see Travis be the CEO of Uber. And I met them in June 2010. And Travis wasn't the CEO at the time. And I passed on the opportunity to invest at, 4 million pre, which is ridiculous when you think about it. So the only one that I really regret and the past didn't make any sense was Twilio, because Dave McClure had priced the seed round at 5 million back in 2009, right? And it was very expensive. And I said, look, it's just too expensive for me. I'll invest at 3 million pre. And Jeff Lawson said, okay, we'll do how's 3.5 million. So I could have invested in freaking Twilio at 3.5 million, but I said, no, I would do it at 3. And so I passed because of a stupid, sort of valuation, which didn't make any sense. And the difference between 3 and 3.5 is nothing. And the big lesson I learned on that one was, valuation is all relative, especially today. And so be more flexible if ever, because if this thing ends up being sort of a runway success, it doesn't matter whether you invest at 3 or 4 or 5.
For sure. It's so difficult to tell if a company will be successful or not at the moment. When I was in China working at a venture firm as associate, I met this makeup company. The founder is trying to open a Taobao store, and at that point, she only had one product. After that, maybe 3 months later, she raised from a top VC firm, launched 30 products. It's so not obvious at that moment to tell which company can execute on their idea.
It's the hardest thing, right? And that's why, everyone sort of celebrates the successes, but remember that half of the companies that we invest in, burn down and go nowhere, right? Because of the power law in venture, at the end of the day, we're going to invest, these days, we're funds, we invest in 30-ish companies, 32, 33, 34. And at the end of the day, only 3 to 5 companies really matter because they're going to return so much of the fund that the rest of the portfolio doesn't really, move the needle. And therefore, you get an open invitation for making a bunch of mistakes and wasting a bunch of money investing in companies that don't work. But the thing is that when you invest, as long as you invest in great founders who are relevant to the industry and have sort of a unique idea of vision and ability to execute, if the product is really sort of differentiated, and the market, if things sort of work out, can really sort of yield a massive sort of company, then it's worth the shot. And you just don't know whether it's going to work. And a lot of business models sort of don't work out, so people don't can't make money or can't make money at scale. A bunch of companies fail because founders and early teams can't execute, right? And therefore can't go anywhere. But a lot of companies will sort of end up going to, $10, $20 million in revenue, and that's it, right? So scaling to 50, 100, 200, $300 million in revenue is so hard that, it only happens, 10% of the time, maybe.
For sure. It's sometimes so hard to tell when it comes to looking for founder qualities. What are some experiences or characteristics that you're actively looking for in founders? Do they have to have a certain track record?
Well, so you have either established founders who have already done something before. So we've been lucky to work with a number of either founders who had already done something with us, so repeat founders with the portfolio. And so when you work with one of those, then you know that they can execute because you've seen them work. Like, we mentioned Poshmark. So when I invested in Poshmark in 2011, I had known Manish Chandra since 2005. And we did another startup together, Caboodle. And Caboodle was really Pinterest before its time, right? Unfortunately, we were a bit too early to sort of figure out how to get to massive massive but I knew intimately what Manish was really sort of good at. And so when he came to pitch me in January 2011, and he said, January 2010, and he said, 2011, and he said, hey, we're going to do this Instagram for, use fashion with a buy button. I was like, huh? Okay. I'm sure you'll figure it out. And he had the core capital team sort of coming back, and I decided to back him. And then, it wasn't always sort of easy, but now it's a massive scale, public company. And so I'd seen him execute, and so I knew he would figure it out. Sometimes you just like, when I met Aaron Patzer at Mint in 2006, he was literally a solo founder who had, coded the first version of Mint 18 hours a day, for 3 months or whatever. And the thing that really sort of impressed me was his determination, his clear vision of what he wanted to do and how he was going to do it, and the vision he had for the product. And Mint, is the company that convinced people to hand off their banking password to an app, right? Because just think about it, like no one was doing that before those guys did. And when they launched in 2007 at TechCrunch 4, and I remember that day because they were on stage at TechCrunch 40, the day I announced my fund 2. And people were like, wait, we're just supposed to give our banking password to an app? What? And that's something that, people have no qualms sort of doing today. And it was sort of Aaron's vision, determination, walk through walls attitude, and ability to, just get people to believe him, that sort of led me to believe that he was going to be able to hire some very, very strong, team members and go out and execute, which he did.
You invested in so many companies when they were really early stage. Is there any companies looking like they're about to fail, but you guys pushed through it? What are some challenges you guys were solving together?
Oh, sure. I mean, look, no company ever gets to greatness without almost dying multiple times, right? So, Poshmark has had its very dark days. I think when Fitbit went public, the CEO said that they almost died 7 times, right? Or something like that, for different reasons. I know I saved them, by sort of managing a last minute sort of funding round that got Brad Fell to invest in the Series A. And, I've also been part of companies that just went very, very well and sky high, like Fab comes to mind, Fab.com, which, we invest in the company 2 years later, they're just doing a round at $1 billion valuation, which was just unprecedented at the time, right? And then they were back down to zero within 12 months, right? So it's not because it's hard that it won't be successful, and it's not because it's successful that it won't fail, right? So you have to have this humility in venture. So both try and push and hustle, but also understand that you can't count your chickens before they hatch, right? And sometimes you have companies like, WeWork comes to mind, right? So they were supposed to go public at 100 billion, and now, they're actually going public at 9 billion, which isn't too bad. But just think about the roller coaster. And every single successful company I've been part of, no matter the exit, has been a roller coaster.
I totally feel you. I can totally imagine that amount of stress. We were chatting about when you moved to Silicon Valley. Ron Conway was the king of Silicon Valley. Now, many years later, new people came in. Curious, whoever was popular back then, are they still popular now? Are the startups that are popular at the beginning stayed popular today? As you know, I'm in my 20s, still haven't really experienced the different generations of startup ecosystem. But from my observation among my friends, when I moved to Silicon Valley, whoever was cool back then are kind of different from the batch of friends who is cool now. If you're investing in friends, what are some characteristics would you look for in your cohort? Is it sustainable to bet on friends who is doing cool things at the moment?
It's the problem is that in my experience of investing in my friends, typically sort of if I invest in my friends because they're my friends, that I will typically lose money. Right? If I invest in people because they really are uniquely positioned to do something and then they become my friends, then it can actually work out. I'm in my 50s, so I've been around the block for a while. And I think, when I think about longevity, so the people who were, something when I got started and are still something. Yeah, I think Ron comes to mind as sort of the godfather of Silicon Valley. Obviously, he's not as involved in actual sort of investing, but his portfolio is just iconic. I'm in awe of what my friend Josh Koppelman, even though Josh is not based here, he's in Philadelphia, has managed to sort of build one of the most iconic VC firms, micro VC firms in the market. In terms of VC longevity, VC is sort of this world where you want to kind of be on top of your game for as long as possible, but then, not wait for you to decline to sort of exit. And so I think one that still amazes me is Bill Gurley from Benchmark, because he's been at it literally, since the 90s, and he's still, so good at it. I don't know where he finds the energy, because it's hard. Like, people sort of think about our job as being, super easy, and we just have to have, lunches and dinners and Zoom calls or whatever, but it's exhausting, right? The ups and downs and all the work and the nonstop nature of what we do, and the failures that we have to deal with, because, we spend way more time with our failed companies than we do with our successful companies, right? Because that's how you build your reputation. You just help anyone who needs sort of help. And so I think about sort of these people as having been around, having been successful, and still being sort of awesome at it. And then there's a new, generation of VCs who are sort of doing really interesting deals and are getting into some of those companies that end up being worth tens or hundreds of billions. And that's sort of amazing. And we'll see what sort of longevity and consistency they have, because, to be a successful investor, you just need one, $100 billion exit. But to be a successful VC, you need to be consistent and produce every fund 3 to 4 multi-billion-dollar or multi-tens of billions of dollar, exit that returns your fund multiple times, so you can provide, top 10%, returns to your LPs. And that's what will keep you in the business forever.
Speaking of returning the fund, first, let's go back a little bit to chat about raising the fund first. You started with investing your own money. You had other investors who invest in future rounds. wants to invest in you. You had other investors introduce you to LPs. Those are some really solid network. At what point did you start raising your own fund, and how did you go about it? Also, a part of the VC job is that it's really interesting that sometimes you have to collaborate on a deal together. But when there's only one slot for a particular investment, you're also competitors with the same group of people, which you're obviously doing really great in the industry. How do you navigate those kind of relationships?
Yeah, I think, look, it's, there's really sort of multiple parts there. So let me try and answer all your questions
Sorry.
in one go. No, those are awesome questions, Grace. So on the VC relationship, yes, it's kind of weird because, you're going to be competing with people to try and win a deal, but then you're going to work with the same people on other companies. And so you can't really sort of burn any bridges or go so nasty that, people sort of hit your guts and won't talk to you anymore. And sometimes, it's awkward, but I'm going to have 3 or 4 of my friends try and invest in one of my companies, and only one of them will be able to. And so I'm going to have to say yes to one, saying, awesome, you got the deal. And then to the others, like, I'm so sorry, dude, but you didn't get the deal, right? I'm working with them on other deals or whatever, and I will come with them because we invest in, 12 companies a year, which means that we'll need to find, about 40 firms to invest in those 12 companies over the Series A, Series B, Series C, right? And so you want to do everything above board and never sort of give people the feeling that they've just been screwed or abused or were not really, treated well. In terms of raising the first capital, so yeah, from 2004 to 2007, I invested, our own capital, right? And that fund was very successful. It's not a fund, it was just our capital. And then in 2007, I had, a bunch of people sort of come to me and say, hey, why don't you sort of raise a fund? Because you've been very successful. And candidly, I'd love to put my money into your fund if ever you raise one. And so I had a bunch of friends, angel investors, who said, hey, just, let us invest, alongside you. But Tim Chang, who was at the time a principal at Norwest Venture Partners, said, hey, we'd love to sort of have access to your deal flow because, we don't want to invest at seed stage because that's not what VC firms do. But once there is something that you've worked on that works, really well, we'd love to sort of do the Series A. And so the team offered to anchor my first institutional fund with Norwest, right? And so you had a VC fund put, 40% of the capital. And then I had a fund of funds, Darwin Venture Partners, sort of do the same. And then the rest was just a bunch of friends who invested, 100 grand or more, just to be along for the ride and to support me. And the thing which was bizarre is that it happened super fast. It was, all said and done in 8 weeks in the summer of 2007, right? And so there is this, reality that the first fund takes always like a ton of time. And I sort of, cheated my way. It wasn't cheat, but I sort of managed to find friends who basically sort of wanted to invest, in me. And it was a small enough fund that I could sort of do it very quickly. What I didn't know is that because I kind of took shortcuts in fund 2, I would pay the price in fund 3 when I tried to raise fund 3. And fund 3 was a $55 million fund that took me 2 years to raise. Mm-hmm. So at some point, you're going to have to spend 2 years on raising something. Mm-hmm. It's sort of, the story that I learned the hard way.
I think you're such a go-getter. You started with action. You use your own money, just started investing. How do you educate yourself on the technical side of things, like learning the term sheets or valuation or developing your own thesis? I know you met Ron Conway and some experts. How do you learn about how to invest?
I think what you do is you just spend time. Remember the first 4 years in the Valley, I was a partner at the VC firm, and so I learned from my other partners who were super smart. John Taysom, our managing partner, had invested in Yahoo, had invested in VeriSign, Fund.com, he was one of the pioneers in corporate VC, and so you basically learn by just looking at other great people sort of do interesting deals, and you sit on boards and you sort of learn from all these people as well. The thing which wasn't as prominent was, the media aspect. That's why I started writing this blog in 2004, because there was just like a handful of VC bloggers. Brad Feld was there. There were just a few people who are, still sort of around. Fred Wilson was there, but there was just like a handful of us. And so that's why I started writing about venture capital, investing, thesis, companies, and so on and so forth. And it helped, tremendously building the brand and deal flow, because I was just one of a few writing a blog. And then in 2007, when I raised Fund 2, I decided to drop the blog because I just didn't have the time, right? I was this, fanatic blogger where I had to sort of edit my posts, for 2 hours before I was happy to, get it out. And it was just taking too much of my time to be on social media. I mean, the early days of social media. And so I decided to drop that. And now you have a bunch of people who are doing interesting things, but it's no more like the early days where there's like 1 or 5 blogs to follow. It's like, there's so much. You could spend your entire day reading VC Twitter or VC Medium or VC blogs or listening to Clubhouse or whatever and do nothing, right? And so I'm now sort of doing none of that.
You kind of answered my next question. You started your career as a developer. You were coding. You were the CTO of a startup. Fast forward to, say, 2019. You were on the board of MVCA. You were on the Midas List, and you were this super successful VC. What transformed you? There's not many people in the world can achieve this level of success. Especially you were not originally from the US. Curious, what do you think you have done right? And what would you do differently if you start over again?
It's luck, right? I think at the end of the day, I just saw the opportunity. I took the shot and decided that if I failed, it was okay, which is very not French. Because in our culture, there is a lot of the impact of failure is real, right? And so a lot of people will just not take risks, because they think that if ever they fail, that would have sort of dramatic consequences. And so I just didn't really care that much. I did care, to be honest, because, I had a young family that, needed to be fed and everything. But we just allowed ourselves to fail for 2 years and then go back to France if ever it didn't work out. And then, I made a bunch of mistakes. Like I said, my entire portfolio is probably one of the best in venture. Unfortunately, it would have been nice if I had not said no to all those great companies, but I've still invested in a bunch of successful companies that have made a bunch of money for my investors. And so I can still, sort of look at, raising funds without having any qualms as to whether I'm going to be able to raise a fund, right? I know that by now I can do pretty much what needs to be done without any question. And, I feel also comfortable sort of investing in things that don't understand or don't know much about, like lab-grown diamonds or space tech or quantum computing or, crypto, NFTs and things like that, where I met this team at Makerspace 2.5 years ago. And what amazed me was those were the guys who had literally built Pinterest and scaled Pinterest. And I spoke to Ben Silverman, and he said, yeah, those guys are incredibly awesome. And what they're doing is really interesting. And so I said, look, I believe that eventually NFTs will be something. And this is probably the team that has sort of an approach to saying, hey, there's going to be such a thing as fine art in the NFT space, and will be the site where supply and demand sort of meets, right? And I thought that was the right thesis and the right team. And I invested, and 2.5 years later, when people sort of decided to put his now famous piece on the marketplace, they decided to work with Makerspace, and this thing sort of sold for almost $70 million. right? And did I know that it was going to work that way 2.5 years ago? No, but I sort of made the rational decision to believe in a future that those guys sort of projected for me, and I thought that they were the right people to do it. And we'll see where that goes, because they're doing insanely well, but it's just so early in this market. We'll see whether they can get to billions of dollars in GMV, which is at the end of the day what it takes for a marketplace to be successful. And they're well on track, but it's still the early days.
For sure. You mentioned such an interesting point about being comfortable of some sort of unknown. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in everything you invest in. If you're a founder today, how would you go about raising money? Also, what type of company would you start, and how would you raise funding for it?
Yeah, I think, the good news is if you're an entrepreneur today, there's a lot of money sort of chasing you, right? Whether it's, 1,000 plus, pre-seed and seed funds, God knows how many hundreds, Series A type funds or Series B type funds that actually sort of have seed programs. You have tons of angels, scout programs, angel list syndicates, and so on and so forth. So like cash is there, like tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, right? The question is, how do you go about finding the right investor who will, see and understand your vision and will really sort of be able to help you go from where you are to the next stage. And typically for most entrepreneurs, the first set of hurdles are, you raise the first round to get to the next round, and then the next round, and then the next round, right? And so think about who out there in your sector has an established track record of building something in your sector or vertical, who has, a track record of building the company to the next level, helping you sort of get to the next round, and gather the right resources in terms of mentors, execs, people you're going to hire that will sort of make you successful, right? And at the end of the day, if you can only raise money from people who won't help you, that's okay, right? Because you need to raise money. But the money with support is really sort of what gets you to success. And I think, the good news for us is we've done so many times this thing of investing in a space we've never invested before, but turn this thing into a success, that people sort of now refer us to, people like Makerspace or Loft Orbital or Space Tech companies saying, look, I don't know whether Jeff invests in this thing, but he has a track record of investing in weird stuff or unusual stuff or the kind of stuff that you guys do. You should talk to him, right? And he will sort of give you some pointers. And so try and navigate the network through your own sort of network of friends, colleagues, and so on and so forth to find the people who sort of have the mix of, cash, willingness to invest, and experience/expertise to help you.
A question on like what you just said. I think what you said is great. I definitely believe like a founder should find someone who can add value beyond the capital. And I'm curious on like, how would you approach those investors who invest in your sector? However, they may invest in your competitor, right? That like they could take like whatever you just said and then give it to another company that they've invested in the space. And knowing that, like, how would you like navigate that?
So two things. It's a great question. Two things. One is, do some research. Like, don't go and send, investors like blindly, like your business plan or your fundraising deck or whatever. Just do some research and understand what they've invested in. If ever you see that they have invested in, your direct competitor, then don't send it to them, because even though everything that's sent to me is confidential, so we'll never sort of forward it to others, because, my reputation is really important to me. Like, you don't want to sort of signal to someone that you're going to compete, right? And, countless of times have I received, oh, we're going to kill Poshmark, we're going to kill Postmates, we're going to kill Even Brighter, we're going to kill whatever. And I'm like, well, but I was kind of the seed investor behind them, so you shouldn't tell me. And, it's hard because if you look at Crunchbase, which is your best friend, because typically Crunchbase tracks everything I announce, like, there is these days about a 1 year, 1.5 year lag between my investment and when the investment is announced, right? Mm-hmm. Like we recently announced that round we did in Trace, which is a CFO dashboard, right? Mm-hmm. We invested 1.5 years ago, right? We just announced because the company was ready to decloak, and so we announced, mm-hmm. That they had raised the round. But sometimes it's hard to know that someone invests in your competitor because it's not public, right? Mm-hmm. And so we'll say, look, we have invested in something directly competitive. We shouldn't talk. Best of luck to you. And it's kind of a risk that you take, but you have to always do research. Like this morning, I got an email from someone saying, starting with "Dear Sir/Madam." Like seriously. Like, is that the best you can do? Like,
did they send it to jeff@yourcompany.com? Yeah. That's crazy.
They sent it to my email, jeff@uncorkcapital.com, and it started with "Dear Sir/Madam." Like, it means that dude didn't do any research whatsoever, because at the end of the day, like, VCs don't want to be just a target of a mailing campaign, right? They want to feel that the reason why you reached out to me is because you know what I'm going to potentially sort of help you with. And I want to see that you know who I am and where you're reaching out, right? And so typically, like, even though, in the history of Uncork and our 240-ish sort of investment, 2 of them have been, cold emails. Like the rest have been direct intros from people in our network, right? So someone who says, hey, there is this founder, and I think what they're doing is interesting and is very, relevant and aligned with what you guys do, you should sort of talk, right? And so you want to think about, like, how can I get the best possible introduction to my target list of investors to give myself sort of the highest chance. Like, I read every single email I get, right? Cold emails and everything. But the likelihood of actually following up and ending up investing is very, 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 very low, right? Like I said, in 17 years and 240 deals, two were cold emails.
Wow. Getting a warm intro is very important. So you mentioned about, like, someone shouldn't come and then tell you they're going to kill Poshmark or Postmates. Totally understandable. But let's say if I'm Drizzly and then my original thought was just, we're going to start with like alcohol and then eventually we're going to branch out to become Uber Eats. At the beginning, I just wanted to do this one thing and then eventually maybe we'll expand. And then does that consider as like a competitor of Postmates? How would you go about that?
I think... because Postmates wasn't really sort of huge on alcohol delivery, I think, like, the problem for VCs is that, it may not be a direct competitor, but it may sort of take a slot in the, general sort of consumer delivery kind of space. And you may not want more than one. Like, that's where understanding the strategy of the fund is really important, because, we're generalists. And so typically we won't invest in 2 companies in the same space. But if you're talking to a consumer-focused sort of firm, then they may have, 2 or 3 different sort of delivery companies, one for food, one for, marijuana, and one for alcohol. And, as long as they don't compete directly, it's fine, right? And everybody's aware of the potential overlap. And so understanding the strategy of the firm, reading their website and their material, and you would be surprised as to how many people reach out to you before they actually have read anything about us, is important. And everyone is different. For us, typically, once we've done, Postmates, that sort of tick the box for consumer delivery, and we're not going to do any other delivery play. The same way, we did Poshmark, and they do secondhand fashion, and you could do other types of secondhand goods, but for us, sort of doing Poshmark was enough. So when you're sort of broad based like we are, you sort of have broader categories than if you are very vertical and say, oh, I'm like, think of it as, if I do nothing but fintech, I'll probably have plenty of companies which are kind of close to each other to build my ecosystem. Whereas for us, who don't really do much in fintech, we have like 2 or 3, and that's enough for us.
Yeah, I definitely.
Once again, understand, do a lot of research on your fundraising targets and understand, the partners, what their style is, how many times they invest, check size and board seats or not or whatever, so that you understand, what you're getting yourself into. And as an entrepreneur, the first thing you need to find is a lead, right? People who are going to be setting terms and helping you sort of put your round together. Because if you're getting a bunch of interest from people who are just followers, it's helpful, but not as helpful.
Totally. I totally agree. Thank you so much, Jeff. We have a 30-second fire round. Yep. First question. You heard about this a million times. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book? Dune from Frank Herbert.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Who made the biggest impact in my career? I would say it's my wife.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Dinner party once where I think it's going to be my team, because I haven't seen my team in a year.
Where can we find you outside of work?
So I'm Jeff on Twitter. So I'm easy to find. I don't really sort of tweet much.
Amazing handle.
And kind of, early mover. I sort of hang out in Tahoe, sort of to ski a bit during the ski season, and Napa Sonoma because I like wine.
Amazing. What's your favorite wine?
Oh, I can't answer that one because there are so many. I'm very eclectic as a Frenchman. So 50% of my salary is French. The rest is, a mix of American, Chilean, Argentinian, Italian, Spanish, Greek, whatever. Like I try and have, a very, very diverse set of bottles that I can enjoy with my friends. Yeah, when I can actually sort of see them, we hopefully will be soon once we get vaccinated.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jeff, for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Grace. It was really awesome.
All right. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. If you like it, please leave us a quick review and hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to receive our updates, please leave your email at smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are at Grace Gong GG. Besides LinkedIn, it's just Grace Gong. I'd love to connect with you and let me know your thought about the show. Now you can also listen to Smart Venture Podcast on YouTube. Go to smartventurepod.com, click the YouTube link on the top banner. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash the like button. See you next time.